Hi, friends. I'm back. And today I really want to talk to you about reliability again, because the last time I talked about quality control, which is, well, oftentimes quality control is really about avoiding mistakes in the first place or about avoiding, say, errors in shipping. But today, what I really want to talk about is something called building trust. So, building trust is, of course, part of your quality control system, but building trust is also about how you handle a mistake. So, last time I talked about quality control and why it's important so that you can avoid them in the first place. But I also think it's really important for you in your jewelry business as an entrepreneur, as the owner of your business and the face of your business often, to have a framework in place for how you're going to deal with errors that you've made for your clients. So I talk about this because I think it's a really good thing to think about before anything happens. How would you manage a problem? How would you manage if you say chip a customer stone? It happens. It's happened to me. It has happened to a lot of jewelers you know. What would you happen if in some scenario maybe you ship late and you have to eat that 10% cost? What happens if you can't deliver a job on time? How are you going to manage this? And I like talking about this because most of us have been customers in the position of receiving bad service or a product that wasn't up to snuff. And, part of the reason why I encourage all jewelers to implement a quality control system, even something as simple as a checklist, is so that you can maintain and not break that trust with the customer who's placing an order from you online. But building trust is this kind of wraparound idea where you really want to infuse it into all of your business and operate with as much integrity as you can. And that actually involves having a plan or some kind of a system or a framework in place so that when a mistake happens, because we are human, we are not making this jewelry as robots, we are people, and mistakes will happen. And it's not about preventing them from ever happening. If you're talking about never ever making a mistake, oftentimes what you're talking about is never trying in the first place. And that's not really the way of most of us who consider ourselves to be artists. And it's definitely not the way of the entrepreneur. We always need to try things. And trying things means sometimes you'll make a mistake. So if you can put yourself into this framework where you understand how you'll recover, where you understand how you'll respond, and how you'll respond with integrity, it makes it a lot easier to try new things in your business. So let's talk about this example of a chip stone. A lot of us have been there. Especially if you're working with, say, a client's antique stone, a client's family stone, you always take the most care that you can. You pass it off to professionals, and or maybe you are the professional and you do it yourself. But something happens in process. You're pushing over the last little bit of bezel. You're pushing over that last prong, and oof, you hear and feel that crunch, and it feels terrible, right? And you're wondering what you're going to do. This was their grandmother's stone, their mother's stone, their aunt's stone. Somebody, it belonged to somebody. It has a lot of sentiment behind it. So, what are you going to do? So, the best policy to move forward with is honesty. You're going to need to tell the customer about what happened and possibly let them make some choices from there. You really do want to give your customers a sense of agency in the process. So, step number one is to tell them what happened. Step number two is going to be about presenting them with choices. Now, this is going to depend on what kind of a job it was, what kind of a stone it was, your existing relationship with the client. All of those things are going to come into play. So, I'm going to give you a few options. So, one possible option is you tell them that you chipped the stone and that the rest of the stone is fine, and you can offer to continue with the setting, knowing that there's going to be a chip underneath the prong or underneath the bezel. You still want to tell them this because it could happen, 20, 30, even 50 years down the road that these folks will decide to unseat this stone again and take it to another jeweler and pass it on to the next person in their family. And when they uncover that and they see the chip, they're going to want an explanation. And maybe you'll still be in business. Hopefully, you'll still be in business 20 years from now. That is our goal, right? But maybe you're not, and they don't have an answer. They don't have a reason why. So you want to be upfront with them about what's going on underneath and take ownership for what you did. The other side of it is that sometimes a chip and a stone, certain kinds of diamonds, it's fairly common practice for some old school jewelers to take those marquise stones and just crack off the tips, right? Some of you might have been taught that. And so under some circumstances, it's actually not a huge deal if a diamond chips, so long as it's going to be covered. The stone might still have integrity and you can continue with the setting, but you still want to let them know and give them some options. One possibility, if, say, the stone is not really recoverable or you have some doubts about the integrity of the stone after it chips, you may have to offer to replace the stone with something comparable. This is, of course, not ideal. You will be out the money. I am going to share that with you up front. You will be out the money, but it allows you to maintain that relationship with the client and show that you will take ownership of your error. Now, a replacement stone might be harder, especially if you're dealing with an antique cut, but there are lots of places to source antique stones from, or to even take a diamond to or any other stone and have that antique cut put into a new stone. So lots of things are possible. Nothing's impossible, right? It's going to hurt a little bit, right? Because it's going to cost you some money. But this is all at the service of providing incredible, full of integrity service to your customers in a way that's going to keep them loyal to you and on your side and brings them inside the process a bit. So this is going to be one of the most expensive options, but possibly the option full of the most integrity. So the last step is also a future step. So remember last time I was talking about quality control. So the last step is to review your policies, to review any custom contracts that you might have for your clients, and to review your insurance policy. Why do you do all of this? Well, chipping and breaking a stone, even a diamond, is just going to happen. On a personal level, I have actually broken at least a half a dozen diamonds in my career of 20 years in jewelry. So it does happen. I know it happens. And this was something that even when I sold custom jewelry, I always let my clients know up front. This is always going to be a possibility. And here's how we'll fix it if a problem occurs. And you have them sign it, but you let them know upfront that this is a possibility and you work out some issues up front. It could be that, let's say you're setting a client's antique grandma's ring. Maybe you do tack on an extra charge just in case. That's a possibility. They may not like that though. Which is why I tell you to go back to your insurance policy and see what you are covered for. One of my examples is that you may have to be in a position of replacing the client's stone if you break it in your studio. This is a thing that happens, and insurance companies know that, especially insurance companies in the jewelry industry. It is worth checking with your insurance company in advance of taking on custom work to find out what's covered because, as I mentioned, that one of the actions you might have to take is replacing the stone. Wouldn't it be great to find out that you can process a claim with your insurance company and have at least some of the cost mitigated by your insurance? So, those are some retroactive steps that you can take, some steps that you can take to maintain that relationship with the customer, and also some future steps to mitigate any problems in the future that might come up that will prepare you and your client for all of these eventualities. And to be totally clear, this is actually a good professional step to take to maintain that contact, to maintain that communication with the client. And I will say, I have absolutely been in the position of having to replace a client's family stone. And it sucked. It sucked to be out that extra money. It really, really did. But the relationship with the client was so important. They continued to purchase from me for years after that. And I wanted to share that there is a happy ending to these kinds of mistakes because approaching these kinds of mistakes with integrity means that you're more likely to retain that person as a customer over a period of years. And really, when we talk about having a jewelry business, when we talk about being an entrepreneur, the vision should be to be able to do this over a long period of time, right? This isn't a fly by night business. Jewelry has been around for thousands of years. You want your business to be around and be able to sustain you. And a lot of times we can get caught up in this short term thinking where we think, oh, shoot, mistake, better cover it up. Or like maybe I'll have to like charge the customer extra for all of these new stones that I'm going to have to order to repair their job. But if you're thinking long term in your business, if you're thinking about how you can keep this person as a client for more than just this job, I would say approach it with that level of integrity and think through what the customer would want from you in this moment. And a lot of times we can take the measure of how we feel when we receive bad, lying, mistaken services versus when somebody has approached us with a high level of integrity and think about how we feel in that moment to be treated as a customer and which would you prefer. And I think if you move forward like that, you'll find that even in the worst mistakes, you're going to keep those customers on board for a very long time.